Hi guys and welcome back to the Bird Photography Show with Glenn Bartley
Hello, everybody.
and me, Jan Wegener. It's great to see so many of you guys enjoying the show, sharing your thoughts and ideas with us in the comments, and also use our process with great success.
Absolutely. So, Jan, what have you been up to lately in I don't know what they call Queensland. It feels like it should be called the Sunshine State, but I think that's Florida. What have you been up to over there in Australia?
Well, it is actually the Sunshine State. It even says it
Oh,
on the
perfect.
license plate.
Oh,
So recently, friends of ours were going away for a few weeks and they were looking for someone to house sit their nice house with a big pool on the Sunshine Coast. So we said, okay, let's do that if we have to. So we drove up there for a few weeks and it was great because we wanted to check out the area anyways. It's one of the areas we thought we might move to eventually anyway. So it was a great opportunity. Some new birds up there, and one of the birds I wanted to get was actually American birds, Pacific golden plovers that always come all the way from Alaska to winter on this weird little channel in a housing estate. Why you would pick that place of all places, I don't know, but the only problem was it's really depending on the tides. Like at high tide, they're standing on the rocks. At low tide, they're running in the mud, so you can't get any shots. Of course, when I got there, super low tide, the birds are all in the mud. So I checked the tides. I thought I'd come back next week. I come back next week, no more birds. They already had left on the airplane back to Alaska. So I'm like, damn it.
yeah, I mean, for one thing, isn't that incredible that those birds are able to migrate in a single flight from Australia to Alaska? There's some unbelievable information that we've learned about bird migrations, and if you're interested, there's one particular fantastic book that I highly recommend, which is called A World on the Wing by Scott Weidensaul. So check that out if you're interested in bird migration. But back to bird photography. The other interesting thing there is how important it is, the specific parameters. Like in this case, it was the tide. Sometimes it's the light. Sometimes it's something else. But basically, even though you were there, the lighting conditions might have been good, you were ready with your equipment, the birds were there, but there's this one thing standing in the way of you getting your shots.
Totally. And I was actually had planned to go there earlier, but I actually wanted to get the birds in the breeding plumage because a lot of the males start to color up. If you wait just long enough before they leave, they color up and you can get some shots. And I saw beautiful males walking in the mud, so they were all there. But as you say, the one little fact that the tides in this case were wrong and I just couldn't get any shots. However, for some reason, there was 3 oyster catchers that were just going absolutely crazy. So there was, I assume it was 1 female and 2 males. And for at least, I'd say 2 or 3 hours, the 2 males would just run around the female, then they would all start screaming. And then one of the males would walk away. And then the other male would come and attack it really hard. So they had like bloody beaks. And then the good thing for me,
Oh, wow.
they would decide to go on this big lap and then flying down this long channel that I was on probably 10 or 15 times. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. I just set myself up down here. I just wait for them to do it again. And they did it a few times and I actually got some really cool flight shots. One you can see right behind me here where they chase each other and then they actually attacked each other mid-air as well. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the take-home message there is sometimes you're trying for one particular thing out in nature, and then all of a sudden, maybe that doesn't work out, or maybe even does work out. But when you recognize a pattern, like you did there, where there was something happening and it was happening repeatedly, and especially when it comes to action shots, because a lot of times we see things happen really quickly, but they don't happen again, and it's like, yeah, that would have been cool to get a shot of that, but in this case, or if you're ever out in the field and you notice a pattern like that, something that's happening repeatedly, your mind should tune into that and think, okay, this is an opportunity to get a great shot, right?
Totally, because it's not easy to get an oyster catcher in flight. And these shots are cool because they're like banking and fighting. Usually you just get them kind of flying past you and it's not very spectacular. Whereas in this case, the hardest thing was to find a good angle because the channel wasn't very wide. So you had all these dark rocks. You didn't want to get those in the back end. So I actually sat in different spots and eventually found one that I liked the best and I got these shots. And with this shot, it's actually quite interesting because you see the one with the 2 birds, but I also cropped this shot to just show the bird on the left, which I almost found more impactful than having the 2 birds in the shot because it's just fully banking mid-air. The wing is actually touching the water. So what do you guys think? Do you prefer the shot with the 2 birds or actually the tighter crop version of just the one bird kind of banking, and you just have that sort of really impactful image.
So Jan, were these oyster catcher shots taken with the R3, your new camera, or were you with the R5?
That was still with the R5 just a few days before I bought the R3.
Now, okay, so these are some awesome shots you got of the oyster catchers. What else were you looking for down on the Sunshine Coast?
Basically, for anything, I didn't really have too many specific targets, and as I said, the season wasn't that great, so there wasn't really just birds everywhere. We went to rainforest to look for birds, but then it was literally the darkest morning ever. It was raining, it was so dark, you literally had to get your phone out with the torch to even walk through the forest.
Definitely another reason you could have used the R3 on that shoot.
Definitely, but again, I didn't have it at that point, but we did actually manage to find a couple other little bush birds, like this little white-naped honeyeater, and I actually set up a little perch hoping it will land on there, but then it actually decided by itself to land on a much prettier, much nicer natural perch. So I was very happy with that image. And then in the afternoon, we're just kind of driving around looking for some other birds, and we come across this creek where we heard this kingfisher, and there was a few sort of obvious stumps in the water. So we set up there, and eventually we actually got one of these beautiful azure kingfishers to land on the perch. I got some nice photos, some nice videos. So that was definitely one of the highlights of the trip. Here we can see my raw file edited with the presets to get me to that nice starting point with nice vibrant colors, nice orange, nice blue. And then here my final edited image, and I just had to work on it a little bit more because it was kind of backlit. It was a cloudy day, but it was still a little bit backlit. So the front side of the bird was a little bit dark. I used a few different curve layers to kind of brighten that up, give that a good look. And then we have the nice looking final image here.
Well, that's an awesome image, Jan, and really well edited. And if you guys want to learn how to take your images to the next level and edit them just like Jan just showed you, we've got some fantastic resources for you. We've got our pro sets, we've got Jan's masterclass, and we've got my ebooks. And you can find links to all of those down in the description. Those are some awesome photos and some fantastic video you captured as well. I was wondering, what lens were you using? Was that with your 600?
Actually, I think the whole trip and all the photos I've shown you were taken with the R5 and the 100 to 500 millimeter lens. A lot of them with the 1.4 extender as well. I also used the 1.4 extender actually for the oyster catches at the start, but then I feel like for fast action, I prefer not to use extenders, especially with the 1.4 extender. You're wide open at f10, so you're struggling for shutter speed as well. So there I didn't use it, but most of the other times I also used it with the 1.4 extender.
We've talked a little bit about this on the show before, but it kind of does start to beg the question. We've got these new, better zoom lenses that are optically excellent, focus really fast, super light. It always comes back to this question, like, do you still really need a super telephoto lens, a 500 or a 600?
Well, I hope so, because I just bought this new RF 600mm lens as well. I don't think I've made a wrong choice here, but I think the question is really just the use case. And there's also situations where you can get photos with a 600mm prime lens that you just can't get with a zoom lens like this. I think for most use cases, this zoom lens is very flexible. You can get some nice images, but then there's also situations with a 600 prime lens where you get images that just look better and different to anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I ask the question, of course, and I hope that we will get there eventually. Like, how awesome would it be if they can make, some of these zoom lenses maybe even a little bit faster optically and weighing less, and especially if we start getting cameras with higher megapixels that you can even zoom into like a 2x crop mode and still have good resolution. But I totally agree. I mean, I can't imagine my sort of bird photography without my 600 f4 for a couple of reasons. One, and they all kind of have to do with aperture, basically. Like, it's not so much the length. Like, you can get, if you have a 500 f4 versus a 100 to 500, it's the same focal length. But at f4, your background often is much easier to manage and get a nice pleasing background. Whereas at f7.1 or f10, like you were saying with the converter, it's getting pretty challenging to get a nice background, especially when you're in the forest. And then the other one, of course, also related to aperture, is oftentimes you're shooting in these really dark environments. And a lens with a maximum aperture of f7.1 or f8, or in the case of some of these Canon small little super zooms, f11, is maybe applicable if you're at the beach and you're shooting those oyster catchers, but if you're in the rainforest and you're starting out at f11, I mean, it's really not what you're after. So I am not quite ready to put my 600 up on the buy and sell forums just yet.
And you can't forget as well that even if you're shooting at 500mm f7.1 on this lens and f7.1 on a prime lens, the prime lens will still have a much smoother, more pleasant looking background, at least for my eyes. So with these prime lenses, you have a smooth background as default kind of built in, whereas with these zoom lenses, it's actually quite hard a lot of times to get a nicely dissolved background. And yeah, definitely in the rainforest, there's a lot more challenges there. But I must say, I've used this lens in the rainforest as well, and it does pretty well. It does all right with the R5. It actually struggles to focus sometimes once it gets really, really dark. But recently I also used it with the R3, and it was actually shockingly fast and accurate even in pretty challenging conditions. But of course, you're always struggling for light there. You're shooting 12,800, 25,600 ISO, whereas if you're using a prime lens that you can open up to f4, you can have lower ISO and still maintain a decent shutter speed.
So yeah, and speaking about 600 millimeter lenses, you've had the new RF 600 millimeter lens for a few weeks now. So I was just wondering, maybe you want to give a short little field review of your experience with that lens so far.
It has to be a very short field review because again, it has been very wet and raining whenever I tried to get out. I did get out to the rainforest the other day, but first of all, what really stands out is just the weight distribution and the lightweight of all of these lenses. It's about a kilo lighter than my previous lens, which doesn't sound like too much, but in the field that actually makes quite a big difference.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest difference with the, whether it was the EF version 3 or the RF. The balance of the lens in combination with the weight savings really makes it more hand holdable. And so it doesn't sound like a lot, two and a bit pounds, but when you're hand holding that lens for an extended period of time, it does feel much more doable.
I can use it without any adapters, obviously, that's nice, but I can also use the new and improved teleconverters with it. With the EF version, you have to use the old teleconverters, which seem to definitely be a bit slower when it comes to autofocusing speed and stuff. And with the new lens, I can obviously use the RF teleconverters, which so far have seemed to work pretty well. And interestingly, when I put my R3 onto my old EF 600mm lens, I didn't notice as much of a difference in like focusing speed compared to like the R5. But when I put the R3 on the new 600mm lens, it's like super rocket fast. And apparently it has 2 autofocus motors back in there. I don't even know if EF version 3 has that. And the R3 with the bigger battery can actually use both of these motors for focusing. So there's a significant increase in autofocusing speed when you use a camera like the R3 or eventually the R1.
We're in this transition period between the EF and RF mount. And at some point, it gets to be too annoying to have to use the converter and some teleconverters, but then not on other things, teleconverters. So like if you have an RF lens and you want to use a converter and you have only EF converters because you use those on some lenses, it just starts to get too messy. And so for me, because I actually don't have any RF lenses yet, I'm kind of still in that camp. When you've gone the other way and you're sort of like, okay, fine, I'm switching. It's happening. It's kind of inevitable. So you're probably just ahead of the curve on this one.
A little bit, but there's some real weight savings as well, because at the moment I had 2 extenders RF, and then I had to also carry 2 EF extenders with me all the time.
That's true.
So that started to be annoying. And then a few times it just happened, you have to 100 to 500, you rip it off the camera, want to put it on the 600, doesn't fit because you didn't have that adapter again, and then you start looking for the adapter. So it's definitely all about the handling. I think it's not some image quality is probably the same, or I think the 600 version 2 is actually kind of the benchmark in image quality. So there's a chance it's actually slightly worse.
Something's still good about my lens.
But not to the degree that you would really notice it in like a real world situation. But it's really all about how it performs with the new cameras and just how the handling is overall.
Totally. I'm sure it's a lens I'm going to add to my arsenal at some point, and it's going to be probably a painful process for my wallet.
So what about you, Glenn? We talked a lot about my sort of little adventures, but it's been like 2 weeks at home, that's usually means you have to get out there again because you don't really seem to like where you live.
I do like being home, but it has been a busy year so far, and you're right. I'm about ready to set off again. My next adventure is actually going to be a big road trip across Canada. So I'm going to be driving all the way out to Ontario and then all the way back, and it's going to be a big photo adventure.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm actually going to go on a road trip myself very soon as well. So we both be on the road. That will be interesting to see how we can still
Nice.
manage to do some episodes.
Yeah, and actually it brings up an interesting question to you guys, the audience. Do you guys enjoy these kind of like back and forth banters while we're in the studio? Or would you rather see more content from Yan and I out in the field where we kind of show you what we're up to from the field? Let us know down in the comments.
How long of a road trip is that going to be for you? And is there like specific birds you want to see along the way as well? Or are you just going to point your camera at everything that moves?
Well, okay, so it's a long drive. I mean, one way from where I live now on Vancouver Island to where I'm going is about let's say 6,000 kilometers if you just type it into Google Maps. But if you actually do some little detours and things like that, it's going to add to that. And that's one way. So all in, I'm going to guess that I'm going to be, 12 to 14,000 kilometers on this road trip. But the good thing about driving such a long distance in a vast country like Canada is that you pass through a bunch of different habitats, which of course means that there's quite a few different birds.
Talking about birds, what birds are you going to bring back to us in the show?
Well, I hope I'll bring back some good birds. Now, for me, of course, because I live further west, I've shot quite a bit in British Columbia and a little bit more in sort of the Rocky Mountains and even a little bit into Alberta. So I think because I'm going east, I'm going to actually just blow through British Columbia and Alberta. The first couple days, just drive like a big push the first few days so that I can spend more time in the east where I've shot less. So really what I'm hoping, I think I'll stop a little bit in the prairies and there's a few birds. I have never really gotten great shots of northern shrikes, although they will be a bit tricky. And there's, even though I've photographed them before, but not super well, like long-billed curlews would be interesting in the prairies. And then I'll probably keep going to sort of the boreal forest region where I can look for some of the really beautiful warblers. Again, just ones that I would like to improve on. Things like Blackburnian warbler. Maybe I'll get lucky with some bay-breasted warblers, but everything should be in perfect breeding plumage, right on their territories, singing, and a little bit easier to find. So hopefully my timing will be right. In theory, the birds should be back about this right time, but sometimes they're a bit delayed or sometimes they're a bit ahead of schedule. And I find really the best time to photograph a lot of these migratory birds is right when they get back on their territories. So fingers crossed I'll have my timing right. There'll be lots of birds singing, lots of things for me to find, and hopefully I'll report back with some great shots of some of these eastern songbirds.
Well, that sounds like an awesome trip. I hope you're going to get some really nice images that you can share with us soon. And I thought at the end I'm just going to share something else with you because I bought a new tripod and pimped up my Wimberley head. I was kind of growing tired of my old big and heavy Gitzo 5541 LS, which I bought in Florida in 2010. So it's done me a good job for sure, but all the rubber was kind of coming loose. So sometimes, especially in the rain, it started to actually be hard to open and close the legs because everything was just slipping and sliding. And so I was looking around, and a lot of you guys gave me some great suggestions in the comments of my early bird photo news show. And I ended up finding this Pro Media Gear tripod, which I just love the specs. I'm like, if this can deliver, this is really good. It's 1.8 kilo, 60 centimeters packed up, and it pulls out all the way to 1.8 meters. So it's really tall, light, and pretty short for a long tripod. So I'm like, that's something I just want to try out. So I got that. What I like, for instance, as well, the legs here, they're like aluminum down here. So there's no rubber that can go loose or anything. So it feels very solid.
Definitely report back on that tripod. I'm curious to know how you make out with that one. You probably need to give it a good several shoots, a good durability test, but we'll look forward to hearing how you make out with that brand. And I think that just about does it for this episode, guys. We hope you've enjoyed the show. And let us know down in the comments, of course, anything you want to see us cover in future episodes, and we will see you in the next episode.
So like always, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you very soon. Bye!
See you next time.